I watched the steam rise from my coffee and tried to remember the last time my husband smiled at me like he used to. It was early morning, and the kitchen was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Sunlight came through the window and made the plates shine, but the air between us felt cold. Daniel sat across the table reading something on his phone. He did not look up. I wanted to ask him if he wanted more toast or if he liked the new jam I bought, but the words stayed inside me. We had lived together for 12 years, and silence had become part of our mornings. When I first met Daniel, everything felt alive. He was kind, funny, and spoke with an energy that made people turn toward him. I loved how he looked at the world, how he noticed small things and made them sound important. He once told me that ordinary life could be beautiful if you paid attention. I believed him. We married young, in a small ceremony at the city hall, and promised each other a simple but honest life. For a long time, I thought we had it. We moved to a quiet town near the river, bought a house with large windows, and filled it with books, music, and laughter. Our daughters, Lily and Emma, came soon after. I stopped working for a few years to care for them, while Daniel built his career as an architect. He worked long hours, but always came home for dinner. Back then, I used to wait for the sound of his car in the driveway. The girls would run to the door shouting his name, and he would lift them in his arms, laughing as if nothing in the world could make him tired. Those were the years that I still believed love could protect us from time. As the girls grew older, life began to feel heavier. Daniel started traveling more for work. He often said he was tired or too busy to talk. Sometimes I would ask him if something was wrong, and he would say, "Everything's fine, really." But I could feel something was missing. His eyes no longer stayed on me when I spoke. He listened, but without hearing. He smiled, but not for long. And slowly, our home became a quiet space filled with polite words and old routines. I tried to fill the silence with small joys. I started painting again, something I loved when I was young. I joined a local art group, and once a week I met other women who painted flowers, people, or landscapes. It made me feel alive again. But when I told Daniel about it, he only said, "That's nice," and changed the topic. I wanted him to care, but I stopped expecting it. One evening, after the girls went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The television was off, and the only sound was the rain outside. I looked at our wedding photo on the shelf. We were smiling, holding hands, standing by the river where he had first told me he loved me. I tried to imagine what those two people would say if they saw us now. Would they understand what went wrong? Or would they believe it was all part of growing older? Daniel came home late that night. I heard his key in the door and waited for him to come in. When he did, he looked tired, his hair wet from the rain. "You're still up?" he asked, surprised. "I couldn't sleep," I said. He gave a short nod and went to the kitchen to pour himself a drink. I wanted to ask him if he was happy, if he still loved me, but something stopped me. It felt like a question that could break the small balance we still had. The next morning, he left early for work. I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the road. Then I stood there for a while, still in my nightdress, thinking how strange it felt to miss someone who was still living in the same house. Life continued, quiet and predictable. The girls went to school, I painted, cooked, cleaned, and managed the house. On weekends, we went to the supermarket together, smiled for the neighbors, and played the role of a happy family. Sometimes I convinced myself it was true. Other times, I saw through the lie. One Saturday afternoon, as I cleaned the kitchen, I found an envelope on the counter. It was a letter from an architecture firm in London. I opened it and read that Daniel had been offered a position there for 6 months. My hand shook slightly. He hadn't mentioned anything about it. When he came home that evening, I asked him. "Oh, that," he said quickly. "It's not confirmed yet. I didn't want to worry you." "Worry me?" I repeated softly. "About what?" He shrugged and said, "It's just work, Anna. It doesn't mean anything." But it did mean something. It meant more distance, more silence, more nights alone. I wanted to be happy for him, but a part of me felt like he was already gone. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote, "We used to dream together. Now he dreams alone." A few weeks later, Daniel left for London. At the airport, the girls hugged him tightly. I smiled and said, "Take care," as if it was only a short trip. But inside, I felt a strange emptiness. When I returned home, the house felt too large. His coat still hung by the door, his toothbrush stood by the sink, and his half-read book was on the table. I touched it and wondered if he would miss me the same way I missed him. Days turned into weeks. Daniel called every few days, sometimes from his office, sometimes from his hotel. Our conversations were short, mostly about the girls, school, and small things. We avoided the big topics. I could hear other voices behind him sometimes, laughter and movement, and I knew he wasn't alone. I didn't ask questions. I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answers. One night, after a long call that ended in silence, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights. The reflection of the glass showed my face, older than I remembered. My hair had more gray than before. My eyes looked tired. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed in shared dreams and forever promises. I wondered if she still existed somewhere inside me. The next morning, I received a message from Daniel. It was short. "Sorry I didn't call last night. Busy day. We'll talk soon." But below, it was a photo. He was smiling with a group of people, holding a glass of wine. Beside him stood a woman I didn't know, with bright eyes and a hand resting lightly on his arm. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I closed the phone and put it away, pretending it was nothing. But all day, my thoughts kept returning to that image. I didn't know who she was. I didn't even want to imagine. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain reminded me of all the years we had spent together, the laughter, the shared dinners, the promises we once made. It felt like those memories belonged to someone else now. I turned off the light and lay awake until morning. When the sun rose, I went downstairs and made coffee. The kitchen looked the same as it always did, but I felt different. Something inside me had shifted. The silence no longer scared me. It was honest. It told me the truth I had been avoiding. We were no longer the same people who fell in love by the river. I didn't cry. I only sat there, holding my cup, feeling the quiet morning around me. I thought about all the years that had passed, all the moments that had slowly built this distance between us. And for the first time, I understood that sometimes love doesn't end with a fight or a goodbye. Sometimes it simply fades, one quiet morning at a time. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe, share, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now, let's continue. When Daniel left for London, I thought time would move slowly, but the days passed in quiet rhythm, one blending into another. The girls went to school, and I filled the hours painting in the small studio at the back of the house. The room smelled of oil and canvas, and when the sunlight came through the window, the air looked golden. I found comfort in it. It became my space, my small world, far from the noise of everything else. At first, Daniel sent messages every night. Simple things. Good morning. Miss you. Tell the girls I love them. But soon the messages became fewer, shorter, sometimes only one word. I tried not to let it bother me, but it did. I knew he was living a different life now, full of new people and new stories that didn't include me. I could feel him drifting further away, and I didn't know how to stop it. I tried to stay busy. I joined a local art show at the community center. It wasn't big, just a few painters and photographers showing their work. I brought 3 of my paintings. One was of the river behind our house, another of the girls playing in the garden, and the third was a self-portrait. I hadn't planned to include that one, but something about it felt honest. I wanted to see how it looked on a wall among other faces. The day of the show, I stood near my paintings and watched people walk by. They looked, smiled politely, and moved on. But one man stopped. He was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a quiet smile. He stood in front of my self-portrait for a long time, then turned to me and said, "This one feels very real." His voice was calm and thoughtful. I thanked him, and we started talking. His name was Michael, and he was a teacher at the local high school. Over the next weeks, I met him a few more times at art events and coffee shops. We talked mostly about books, art, and life in small towns. He spoke gently and listened carefully, something I hadn't felt in a long time. There was nothing romantic between us, but there was warmth. It reminded me that connection still existed, even if it wasn't love. At home, I kept everything the same for the girls. I didn't want them to feel the distance between their father and me. We had dinner together every evening, talked about school, homework, and the small dramas of their teenage lives. They sometimes asked when their father would come home, and I always said, "Soon." I wasn't sure if they believed me. One night, after they went to bed, I sat alone and opened my laptop. I looked at Daniel's social media page. He had posted pictures from a dinner event in London. In one of them, I saw the same woman again. Her name was marked in the photo. Julia. She worked with him. I stared at the picture for a long time, my hand still on the mouse. They looked happy. Maybe it was nothing more than friendship. Maybe it was something else. I didn't know, and I didn't want to imagine. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk. The air was cold, and the river was covered in mist. The world felt empty and beautiful at the same time. I walked for almost an hour before I stopped on the bridge and watched the water move under it. I thought about how everything changes, even when we try to hold it still. Water keeps moving. Time keeps moving. Maybe love does too. That afternoon, Michael called. He asked if I wanted to visit a small art gallery in the city. I hesitated but said yes. The girls were at a friend's house, and I had nothing else planned. The gallery was small but full of color. We spent hours looking at paintings, talking about which ones we liked and why. It was simple, but I felt lighter. On the way back, we stopped for coffee. He told me about his late wife, who had died of cancer 5 years ago. He said he still missed her but had learned to live with the emptiness. I told him about Daniel, though not everything. He listened quietly and said, "Sometimes people lose each other long before they say goodbye." His words stayed in my head for the rest of the day. When I came home, I found a message from Daniel. He said he might need to stay longer than planned. 6 months could become a year. I read it twice and then closed my phone. I didn't reply. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I only felt tired. It was as if something had ended and I was too calm to fight it. A few days later, I decided to visit my parents. They lived 3 hours away in a quiet seaside town. I hadn't seen them in months. My mother was happy to have me there. We sat in the kitchen drinking tea, and she asked about Daniel. I told her he was busy. She looked at me with her soft, knowing eyes. "You look lonely, Anna," she said gently. I smiled and said, "Maybe I am." She took my hand and said, "You always wanted everything to be perfect. But life isn't perfect, my love. You can't fix what someone else doesn't want to mend." That night, I slept in my old bedroom. The sea wind came through the open window, and I felt like a child again. I thought about the years with Daniel, the laughter, the small joys, and how slowly they had turned into silence. I realized that the hardest part wasn't losing love. It was losing the person you used to be when you were loved. When I came home 2 days later, the girls were happy to see me. I cooked their favorite meal, and we ate together while music played softly in the background. For a moment, the house felt alive again. I looked at them and thought, maybe it's enough to give love to the people who still need it. That evening, I went to my studio and started painting again. I didn't plan what to paint. I let my hands move without thinking. The image that came was of a woman standing by a window, looking out at a world full of light. Her face was calm but strong. When I finished, I stepped back and looked at it. It felt like me, but not the same me from before. It was a woman who had learned to live with what she couldn't change. Weeks passed, and I heard less and less from Daniel. The girls still spoke to him online, but his calls were short and distracted. One night, I told them we might need to make some changes. I didn't explain everything, but they seemed to understand. Children always know more than we think. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I opened my journal again. I wrote, "He built walls with silence. I built a life within them. I closed the book and felt peace. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping for him to come back as the man he used to be. I was learning to live in my own way." One Sunday morning, as I was hanging clothes outside, my neighbor called me over. "Your paintings are lovely," she said. "I saw one in the cafe by the station. Everyone loves it." I was surprised. Michael had asked to show some of my work there weeks ago, and I had forgotten. Hearing her words made me smile. It was a small thing, but it meant that something I created had found its place in the world. That evening, I walked to the cafe. My painting hung on a white wall near the window. It showed the river and the soft light of early morning. I watched people come and go, some stopping to look at it, some not noticing. I didn't mind. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud of myself. Not for being perfect, not for being someone's wife, but for simply being me. When I returned home, I made tea and sat by the window. The sky was turning orange as the sun went down. I looked at the garden, at the trees moving in the wind, and I felt something close to happiness. Not the loud, exciting kind, but the quiet one that comes when you start to belong to yourself again. I thought of Daniel, far away, living his own life. I didn't know if he would come back or if I wanted him to. I only knew that the space between us no longer frightened me. It had become something else, something peaceful. The distance between us had taught me who I was when I was finally alone. When Daniel called to say he was coming home, I was in the garden cutting flowers. The air was warm, and the trees were full of soft green leaves. I stood there for a moment, holding the phone in my hand, feeling something between surprise and fear. It had been almost a year since he left. His voice sounded calm, almost friendly. He said he would arrive the following week. I told him that the girls would be happy to see him. I didn't say anything about myself. For the next few days, I moved through the house slowly. I cleaned, changed the sheets, and tried to prepare things, but my heart wasn't ready. It felt strange to think that he would walk through the door again after so long. I didn't know who he was anymore, or who I had become. The girls were excited, especially Lily, the younger one. She made a small sign that said "Welcome home," and put it near the front door. I helped her tape it to the wall, smiling even though my hands were shaking a little. The day Daniel arrived, the sky was cloudy and a soft rain began to fall. I saw his car from the window. He looked older, maybe thinner, but still like the man I used to know. The girls ran outside before I could say anything. They hugged him, laughing, and he lifted them both like he used to when they were small. I stayed at the door, waiting. When he looked up and saw me, he smiled, but his eyes didn't hold the warmth they once had. I smiled back, careful and polite. That evening we had dinner together. It felt both familiar and strange. The girls spoke quickly, trying to tell him everything that had happened while he was away. Daniel listened and laughed, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. When they went upstairs, silence filled the room again. I cleared the plates while he sat quietly at the table. After a while, he said, "You've changed, Anna." I looked at him and said, "So have you." It was the truth. He nodded slowly, but neither of us said more. Over the next few days, life returned to something that looked normal from the outside. Daniel went to his office, the girls went to school, and I continued my painting. But the house didn't feel like it used to. It was as if two different worlds were living inside the same walls. He tried to be kind, to talk, to make plans for the future. But there was something between us that couldn't be crossed anymore. One night we sat in the living room after dinner. The television was on, but neither of us was watching. I asked him quietly, "Was it good for you there? In London?" He looked at me for a moment, then said, "It was different. Busy. Lonely sometimes." I wanted to ask about the woman, Julia, but I didn't. I didn't need to. I could already feel the truth in the way he spoke, in the careful way he avoided my eyes. Later that week, I went to the small cafe where my paintings were displayed. I hadn't been there in a while. When I walked in, the owner smiled and said that one of my paintings had been sold. I felt a small wave of pride. For the first time, something I had created would live in another home. It made me realize that I had built something of my own during the months he was away. I was no longer just waiting. I was growing. That night when I came home, Daniel was sitting on the sofa with a glass of wine. He looked tired. I sat across from him. For a few minutes we said nothing. Then he spoke. "Anna, I know things have changed. I can see it. I don't want to pretend everything is fine. I think we both know it isn't." His voice was soft, and his eyes were full of something close to sadness. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "We both know." He told me that in London he had met someone. He didn't try to lie. He said it had started with friendship and had become something more. He said he didn't plan it and that it was already over. I listened quietly. My heart hurt, but the pain wasn't sharp like I imagined. It was calm, heavy, like something I had already accepted long ago. When he finished speaking, I looked at him and said, "Thank you for being honest." That was all I could say. After that night, something changed between us. There was no anger, no shouting, no long conversations about blame. We spoke honestly for the first time in years. We talked about what we wanted, what we had lost, and what still mattered. We both agreed that we wanted peace for ourselves and for the girls. It was strange how gentle the end of something could be. We told the girls a few days later. They were quiet. Lily cried, and Emma looked angry at first, then tired. I explained that their father and I would live in different houses, but would both still love them in the same way. Daniel nodded and took their hands. I could see tears in his eyes. That night, after they went to bed, I sat outside in the garden. The air was cool, and the stars were faint behind the clouds. I thought about how endings can sometimes look simple but carry years of hidden weight. The weeks after that were full of small changes. Daniel found an apartment in the city. He came to visit the girls every weekend. At first, it felt strange to see him walk through the door and leave again. But slowly, it became part of life. We were kind to each other, careful with words, careful with time. I didn't hate him. In a quiet way, I still cared about him, but not as a husband. It was more like caring for a person you once knew deeply but can never return to. My days became my own again. I painted more than before. I started teaching small art classes at the community center. At first, only a few people came, but soon the room filled with laughter and color. I liked watching them paint, each person trying to put their life on a piece of canvas. Sometimes I thought that maybe we all do the same in different ways. We try to paint something that makes sense out of what we have lived. Michael still came by sometimes. We had coffee or walked by the river, talking about work and life. He never asked too many questions, and I liked that. There was peace in our silence. I wasn't looking for love, but I had learned to enjoy company without fear. One afternoon, Daniel came to pick up the girls for the weekend. He waited at the door while I helped them pack. Before leaving, he said, "You look happy, Anna." I smiled. "I think I am," I said. He nodded, looked at me for a moment and said, "I'm glad." When they drove away, I stood at the window watching the car disappear down the same road he had left on a year ago. This time, I didn't feel empty. I felt free. That evening, I made myself dinner and ate outside in the garden. The sun was setting, and the air smelled of grass and flowers. I could hear distant laughter from a neighbor's house, and I smiled. It felt good to be part of the quiet world again. I thought about the years that had passed, about how love can begin so brightly and then slowly fade. I no longer saw it as failure. It was part of being human. We change, we grow, and sometimes we grow apart. Before going inside, I looked at the sky. It was soft and golden. I thought about Daniel, wherever he was, and hoped he had found peace too. Then I thought about the girls, and how life would move forward for them, full of new beginnings. I felt proud of how strong they had become. Later that night, I went into my studio. The light was soft, and my unfinished painting waited on the easel. It showed the same woman by the window, but now I added something new. I painted a small open door behind her, with light spilling through it. It meant freedom. It meant choice. It meant that life would continue. When I finished, I stepped back and looked at it. I smiled quietly. It felt complete. I turned off the lights and went upstairs. The house was silent, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. I walked past the girls' empty rooms and stopped at the window at the end of the hall. The moonlight touched the glass, and I could see my reflection. I didn't look sad. I looked calm, older, but alive. I thought about everything I had been through, everything I had learned. Love had changed, but I had changed too. I went to bed that night with the window open, listening to the sound of the wind moving through the trees. It was the same sound I had heard years ago when Daniel and I first moved into this house. But now it felt different. It didn't speak of loss anymore. It spoke of life. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, not in sadness, but in quiet acceptance. The distance between us was no longer something to fear. It was simply space I had learned to live within and to finally call my own. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.